Battleground New York City, the fight for your vote. Your front row seat to the battle for New York's next mayor. It's the old guard clinging to power, chasing a candidate they never saw coming. Every night, our experts break it down.
What New Yorkers want above all else is authenticity.
We're listening to the people who matter most, you, the voters. And when the candidates sit across from us, nothing's off the table. What's your plan to make New York City feel like a safer city?
S.E. Cup, that's your perception. Of course, there's a lot of crime.
So what's happening right now? Let's dive in. Welcome to Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote. It's Wednesday, September 17th, and we are 48 days away from this all-important New York City mayoral race. There's movement on the campaign trail. Things are happening, and we've got it all covered for you right here. Later in today's show, we'll talk about the frontrunner and his Jewish support with one activist who says, not so fast. But first, as always, let's get to news off the campaign trail. Joining me now is Ayana Harry, political correspondent for Spectrum News NY1. Welcome back, Ayana.
Thanks. It is great to be with you again.
Okay, another day, another endorsement.
Yes.
We've got today Assembly Speaker Carl Heastie. He finally gave his endorsement to Zohran Mamdani. Ayana, tell us what he said. What are we reading inside this endorsement?
Assembly Speaker Carl Heastie acknowledged the campaign message that Zohran Mamdani has been speaking about for months, this message of affordability, that it has resonated deeply amongst New York City voters. I do believe this is a significant endorsement. Speaker Heastie is essentially Zohran Mamdani's boss up in Albany, and the mayor of New York City works closely with the governor and the Assembly Speaker to advocate for the city's priorities in Albany. So this could be a truly significant endorsement for Zohran Mamdani if he does become mayor, because as mayor, you're going to have to spend a lot of time advocating for the city amongst the legislature.
Okay, I'm really glad you said all that and laid it out, because I think most people don't know who Carl Heastie is outside of New York politics. So are you suggesting this is an important endorsement, not really for voters, but for a Mamdani?
Yes, if he is
Mayor's
going to
office.
govern effectively, this endorsement is going to be key for Zohran Mamdani. Carl Heastie, he usually likes to shy away from the public spotlight. I'll give him that. But he is incredibly powerful when it comes to determining which issues the state legislature, the state assembly is going to take up, issues that really resonate for voters all across, not just New York City, but New York State, issues like taxes and whether or not the state is going to modify key laws like bail reform or discovery.
So you mentioned he was Zohran Mamdani's boss in Albany. What was his hesitancy? Why did he take so long? And what should we read in that?
Like so many other high-profile Democrats, Carl Heastie has said he had some disagreements with Zohran Mamdani. He wasn't fully convinced, but it seems like now that the governor has endorsed Zohran Mamdani, it's sort of been a signal for other prominent Democrats in the state that, you know what, if the governor is backing him, I can do so as well.
Speaking of the governor, Kathy Hochul gave Mamdani her endorsement over the weekend, as you know, and he has yet to return the favor and endorse her for her gubernatorial reelection. What should we read in that? That sounds bad.
Yeah, SE, former Governor Andrew Cuomo was very quick to point out that Zohran Mamdani did not immediately endorse Kathy Hochul. But we have to remember, Kathy Hochul, she's not up for re-election until November of 2026. So at this point, it's unclear whether in more than a year from now, voters will even remember that Zohran Mamdani did not endorse her right away. However, if we get closer and closer to November and he still hasn't gotten on board with the governor and he's mayor of New York City, that is going to begin to raise some questions, just like, raise questions for voters as to why Kathy Hochul took so long to endorse Zohran Mamdani.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about a new Marist poll. It has Mamdani winning 45% of the vote, with his closest competitor, Andrew Cuomo, at just 24%. Much closer, though, if it's just a Mamdani Cuomo matchup. So, Ayana, I'll ask the daily question. Any news on whether incumbent Mayor Eric Adams is going to drop out?
SE, you may have to continue asking that daily question for a few more days, because though I continue to hear from sources that the mayor is exploring his options, including leaving the race as soon as this week. Publicly, we're seeing something completely different from Eric Adams. Not only is he continuing to campaign, but he's campaigning even more aggressively. So before he went weeks at a time without any campaign events, now he is holding several campaign events within the afternoon.
Very interesting. Okay, let's talk about polls. A new report out by the city asks an important question. It says pollsters missed the Mamdani primary sweep. Can we trust them in the general? The polls, as you know, had Andrew Cuomo winning the primary. Are
Yes.
we over indexing the accuracy of the polls now?
I will note there was one poll that did project Zohran Mamdani as the winner of the Democratic primary. That was at Emerson College poll, which came out right before the primary. But look, all of the pollsters that I know, they pride themselves on finding people who are regular voters, people who go to the polls year after year after year. But Zohran Mamdani changed the game because he registered new voters. He was able to get
Yep.
people to the polls who hadn't voted in years. And so that's a little bit tricky for pollsters when they try and measure who they expect will be voting. And so we do have to keep that in mind as we look at all of these polls leading up to November. But it could also signify if Zohran Mamdani's support is being underpolled, his support may in reality already be over 50% across New York City.
Exactly. I was just thinking the same thing because, I've been in this business a long time. Polls don't often reach young or first time voters. Why? Because you're calling people on landlines at their houses in the middle of the day and right. So that's always been tough to measure, but we know that Zohran Mamdani is doing really well with those voters. So it could be possible that the polls, which show him winning handily, are actually under indexing how well he's doing, which would be wild.
And his campaign is continuing to knock on thousands of doors. And so it does appear that they are still reaching out to new voters. And we'll have to see what that turnout ultimately looks like in just under 7 weeks.
I'll remind people, as I do every political election cycle, polls are a snapshot in time. Okay. They're a snapshot in time. They are not predictive and they are not telling where we're going to be in November. So keep watching this election, keep watching this space. And Ayana, stay right there. I've got more excellent questions for you after the break. Battleground NYC. We'll be right back. We're back with more Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote. And I'm joined once again by Ayana Harry, political correspondent for Spectrum News NY1. Ayana, in that same poll we were just talking about, that Marist poll, another interesting data point. While Andrew Cuomo won most Black precincts in the Democratic primary in June, nearly half, or 47% of likely Black voters say they will back Mamdani in the general. That is compared to 26% for Cuomo now. That is very bad news for Andrew Cuomo, who I know is depending on mostly an older Black voter to turn out and help him close that gap with Mamdani. So what happened since the primary?
Well, you have to remember, Andrew Cuomo has been speaking to and connecting with voters in Black communities and in particular in Black churches for more than a decade. They know who Andrew Cuomo is. They remember him during the pandemic as a voice of reason and information. But Zohran Mamdani, he's also been making that outreach to these same communities as well. And I've seen that outreach happen long before the Democratic primary. So I think he's just beginning to catch up. His message is beginning to catch on. And now we're seeing more and more voters, in Black communities listen to Zohran Mamdani and take his message seriously. And one indication of that is Mamdani is being invited to speak in some very well-established and large African-American churches in New York City, something that you typically wouldn't see just a few weeks ago. So as his message continues to spread, I think particularly that issue of affordability, it's connecting with voters, it's driving them to say, you know what, I want to vote for Zohran Mamdani over some of the other candidates this fall.
So let me just follow up. Do you think this shift in Black voters in New York City is because they are open to Zohran Mamdani's messages more than they had been in the past? Or do you think it's a reflection of where they think this race is? And Cuomo's not going to get over the finish line, so now it's time to move on to the front runner.
I think it's a little bit of both, but I do think that, Zohran Mamdani spent a lot of time knocking on doors within the Black community with community leaders, trying to get an audience with the people who they work with for months and months and months leading up to the primary. Some Black leaders, that I've spoken to were eager to open the doors. Others were a bit more hesitant. But I think once they saw him win the Democratic primary and win so decisively, then they began to take him more seriously. Then they began to invite him into their community meetings, into their churches. And I think that's largely why we are seeing more and more Black voters get to know Zohran Mamdani, because they're exposed to him now, and they're liking what they're hearing.
Interesting. Okay. In the same topic, a new PAC called Livable Future is working to help Mamdani with Black homeowners. What issues do you think they're focusing on specifically with Zohran and Black homeowners?
Look, I think this outreach is important because when you focus your campaign on freeze the rent, that leaves homeowners asking, well, what about me, right? And also, we have in many traditional African-American neighborhoods, from Harlem to Crown Heights, multifamily units. So many Black homeowners are also landlords. So that left them wondering, where do I fit within Zohran Mamdani's message? And so what we're seeing this new outreach focus on are ways in which he would help, for example, lower utility bills for homeowners and also focus on pollution and reducing that. And so this PAC is really going to be speaking to voters in neighborhoods like East Flatbush in Brooklyn, neighborhoods like Wakefield in the Bronx. These are neighborhoods with a larger Caribbean American population, with homeowners. And so, freeze the rent may not go over with these voters. So they are trying to highlight some of the other ways in which Zohran Mamdani hopes to lead as mayor.
Okay, really good context. And speaking of housing, the mayor's not the only thing on the ballot in November. There's a lot of important housing proposals that will be on the ballot for New York City voters. Can you just tell us sort of generally what they're focusing on?
It's going to be so important for New York City voters to flip the ballot over and look at the ballot measures on the back. So what the mayor is trying to do is change the way in which new housing proposals, new housing projects, skyscrapers, medium-sized buildings, how they are approved or rejected in the city. And so the mayor's trying to move some of that power and control over approvals away from the city council and move it over to City Hall. So what we have right now is something called member deference. So typically the local council member for a neighborhood, if they don't want a project, they can reject it and the council will go with their vote. And the mayor is saying that practice has led to too many projects being canceled.
Okay, so interesting and important stuff for New York City voters. Like we've been saying for a month now, housing is top of mind to a lot of New York City voters in this race. Ayana, thanks so much as always for joining us. You really bring us great reporting and context.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, up next, as the campaigning continues, Zohran Mamdani is polling well among Jewish voters. But is there more there than meets the eye? We'll be right back. Welcome back to Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote. If you look at some polls, Zohran Mamdani is leading among New York's Jewish voters. But other polls have him well behind incumbent Mayor Eric Adams, or even tied with Andrew Cuomo. So what's the story there, and what do Jewish voters need to know about the frontrunner before they vote? Joining me now for the bigger picture is Amanda Berman, founder and CEO of Zioness Action Fund, an organization that is both, quote, unabashedly progressive and unapologetically Zionist. Amanda, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure to be here.
Oh, I'm glad you're here. Before we get to the election and the issues, please tell our viewers about Zioness and its mission.
Sure. So we launched Zioness Movement, which is a nonpartisan nonprofit organization in 2017 to respond to what a lot of American Jews were experiencing, which was a feeling of othering or marginalization or even just unwelcome inside social justice spaces, inside progressive movement coalitions and in partnerships that our community has long been at the forefront of organizing around. And it felt like anti-Semitism, but so many members of the Jewish community couldn't really identify it or respond to it in a way that they felt was going to be effective or constructive. And so a lot of Jews started feeling like they had to leave the left, like it wasn't, an activist role for them, like participating in social justice movements wasn't a welcome space for Jews. And I identified that feeling as anti-Zionism. I realized that there was a sort of demonization of Jews as Zionists, and there's a lot to sort of unpack about that. But so I created Zioness movement as a space for Jews to organize proudly as both Zionist and progressive, and to really confront the idea that there's some inherent conflict between those two identities. And then last summer, we launched the Zioness Action Fund to support Vice President Harris in her bid for president, and to speak to our community and to speak to the Democratic Party about these issues.
And so who are you backing in this race?
So unfortunately, in the mayor's race in New York, none of the candidates have actually earned our endorsement. It's been a really challenging moment, I think, not just for American Jews, but definitely for our community, because it's a crowded field full of candidates who are deeply flawed in lots of different ways. And so, like so many New Yorkers, members of Zioness are going to have to make individual decisions really about who they think is the least worst option. And so we're not affirmatively endorsing anyone right now.
Gotcha. What do you make of the polls and where Jewish New York voters are in this race?
So I appreciated your framing of it, because there are, I think, frankly, some bad faith efforts to paint Jewish voters as being overwhelmingly supportive of Mamdani, which just doesn't add up in terms of the polls that I do trust, that I do think reflect, certainly in my conversations, including with progressive Jewish New Yorkers, where we are. A recent Siena College poll found that actually he has 75% unfavorability among Jewish voters. And the New York Solidarity Network has done, a really extensive poll, and they really have done a lot of work to build out. It's very actually hard to identify Jewish voters, to do proper polling of Jewish voters, because we don't segment the same way. And the New York Solidarity Network found that 51% of Jewish voters believe that he is anti-Semitic. 68% have very serious concerns about his views toward our community. 58% of Jews believe that we will be less safe in a New York City run by Zohran Mamdani. And even among the Jews who do support him, only 17% of those actually support him because of his views on Israel and Jews and anti-Semitism and Zionism. So the sort of framing or painting of Jewish voters as supporting him is, in a sense, a kind of gaslighting. And really, it's a tokenization of anti-Zionist Jews that we've seen happen over and over again, certainly since October 7th, but also long before, where anti-Zionist Jews, who actually represent a tiny fringe element of our community, are platformed and speaking on behalf of us in a way that is totally unrepresentative.
I saw that Siena College poll, and I've also seen criticism of the New York Times for not saying Jews are with Mamdani enough. This seems to be a very contentious issue, the polling of Jewish voters in this specific race, and the telling of the Jewish story in this race. It seems like there are lots of different stories to tell, and a lot of folks are kind of mad at the way those stories are being told.
I think that's true. And again, I just so appreciate your sort of interest in diving into that. There is no monolithic Jewish story, which I know,
Right.
a lot about the fact there's no monolithic story for any community. And for sure,
Right.
younger Jewish voters are more aligned with Mamdani than older Jewish voters. There are a lot of things that I think are contributing to that, including the fact that while I think that his positions are about anti-Semitism and not about Israel, the war in Israel, which is, hugely unpopular among everyone, including most of the Jewish community, is, I think, coloring people's ability to feel proud and to be able to stand up as Jews and to say, I'm concerned about, my rights, my bodily integrity, my safety. What I think is really important to remember is that Jews make up only 2% of the population of this country and 1/5 of 1% of the population of the world. And yet we are the victims of 70% of religiously motivated hate crimes. I mean, it is so astounding. And so when you have a candidate like Zohran Mamdani saying things that, feel challenging, and then even just yesterday saying that he wanted to rescind an executive order on the application of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, it makes Jews feel unsafe, even if they're not articulating it in the polls.
Sure. These are really important conversations to have, so I'm glad you're here. Stay right there because I have some more questions. Battleground NYC will be right back. And we're back with Battleground NYC one more time with Amanda Berman, founder and CEO of Zioness Action Fund. Amanda, a report from AM New York shows Governor Hochul's endorsement of Mamdani got mixed reaction from Jewish advocates. What did they object to?
So again, because we're not a monolithic community, there are going to be a lot of different opinions on it. I think given that he is very likely to be the next mayor of New York, there is a desire in seeing the party come together in a lot of ways and to see the governor actually helping him lead in a way that is reflective of the diversity of New York City, where he can succeed because his success, if he does win, is all of our success. So, I think that's one sort of lane. I think in another lane, there's a sort of sense of confusion or surprise because Governor Hochul is both an extraordinarily close friend of the Jewish community in every way and also has been very critical of Mamdani in lots of ways. And so I think it sort of came out of nowhere. I certainly was not expecting it. At least I wasn't expecting it. I think there are questions in terms of what happened. Did he offer something to her? Is he going to soften his positions on something? In her op-ed, she made very clear that she still has a lot of disagreements with him.
She did, yeah.
It certainly is worth noting, as you did in the last block, that he did not turn around and endorse her back. And he also, of course, last summer did not endorse Kamala Harris for president. And so he's not exactly a party player. I hear people saying vote blue no matter who, which has not historically been his position, at least in terms of his public advocacy. And so, it is interesting that she made the decision to come out and do this. It's not really clear why she did that.
Yeah, I read a lot of that sort of consternation in her endorsement as well. Like, I know this is going to be problematic for some people. Let me tell you, I got all these assurances, and here's where I've disagreed with him. I read it all. I read all the lines in between them. Let's talk about the state of the progressive movement right now, where you live. Clearly, it's where the energy and the organization is in the Democratic Party. But do you see it as a blueprint to win elections everywhere, even in red states, even in, Georgia, Michigan?
So I certainly do not think it would be wise for the Democratic Party to uplift at least the Zohran Mamdani DSA element of the progressive movement as representative of the entire Democratic Party. And if you look at the polls from last summer, it is very clear why. A Siena College New York Times poll last summer said 47% believe Kamala Harris to be too liberal or progressive. Zohran Mamdani is far to the left of where Kamala Harris was. And so, it's not to say that in very blue cities, in very blue states, we shouldn't have progressive policies and fight to advance those. I want those policies. I don't know that Zohran Mamdani will be able to effectuate them, but I have no problem with the Democratic Party uplifting, housing access, food security, affordability, the pay gap, minimum wage. There's so many, healthcare, of course, so many issues that I think as progressives, we do want the party to be lifting up and actively, quite aggressively fighting for. But I don't think that the sort of culture war issues that Mamdani, tends to represent in lots of ways, certainly defunding the police and issues like that. And I do believe anti-Semitism is an issue that signals something far beyond the Jewish community in terms of a tolerance for positions that are not representative of the Democratic coalition.
And I know inclusion is important to you and your group. You talk about it a lot. Both parties, I think, have been engaged in this kind of purity testing of their members and their voters in recent years. And that's just moved the parties to the extremes. What's your prescription just for the Democratic Party where you live inside of it? What's your prescription?
So as a progressive, I want the progressive movement, which of course is part of the Democratic Party, to really live by its own values. And inclusion is supposed to be what it means to be a progressive. As progressives, we believe in uplifting persecuted minority communities. We believe in collective liberation for everyone. We believe in building diverse coalitions that actually advance all of us together. And the progressive movement has not actually been leading with those values. And so I do want the Democratic Party to sort of take the good ideas of the progressive movement, reject the bad ideas of the progressive movement. And I really want us to focus on all of the many things that we can do, including, by the way, what DSA, the Democratic Socialists, have been doing so effectively, which is actually recruiting and training the next generation of political leadership. There are an extraordinary cadre of young progressives, liberals, activists who we could be uplifting in lots of ways for the future of our party.
It's really good advice. It's good advice to Democrats, but it's good advice for everyone. And to hear you say the good parts of the progressive movement and the bad parts, I mean, even that admission, we just don't hear a lot from political people saying, some of the stuff we've done is not great, or has it worked?
Not
And
work.
we should examine it. So I really appreciate you being here. Thanks so much. And more Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote, will be here Monday through Friday. Thanks for tuning in.